Why do I feel so weak? Why do I struggle with things that seem simple for others? Why do I keep fighting invisible battles no one else sees? The answer often leads back to your father. A father doesn't just raise a child, he raises their inner voice. The voice you hear when you doubt yourself, when you fail, when you're afraid to take your next step. For some, that voice is supportive. For others, harsh. For many, absent. But maybe for you, it became a voice that makes you shrink instead of rise. Think about how a child learns strength. Children watch how their parents respond to life. They learn whether the world is safe or dangerous, whether emotions are something to express or hide. If your father raised you with silence, you learn to silence yourself. If he raised you with anger, you learn to walk on eggshells. If he had impossible standards, you learned nothing you do is enough. If he was absent, you question your worth. If he was unpredictable, you learned to overthink everything. If he wanted you strong by not feeling, you confuse numbness with strength. If he never apologized, you learned admitting mistakes is dangerous. If he demanded perfection, you developed anxiety disguised as ambition. If he lived shrinking from his potential, you inherited a blueprint for shrinking from yours. None of this makes him bad. It makes him human. But it means you grew up defending yourself from things you never should have had to. And maybe that's why you feel weak now. Not because you are weak, because you grew up in survival mode. That's not poetry. That's neuroscience. Studies show that environments shaped by unpredictability or emotional distance affect the development of stress pathways, confidence, and decision-making. Your nervous system was trained from childhood to anticipate danger instead of possibility. Think about how much of you was shaped by trying to solve someone else's emotional puzzle. You learned to hide your true self because being seen felt unsafe. That's not weakness, that's adaptation. But here's where life becomes complicated. What protected you then limits you now. You learned emotional freezing as a child, now you call it indecision. You learned self-doubt early, now you call it humility. You learned to avoid conflict, now you call it peace. You learned to depend on no one, now you call it strength. You learned to stay small, now you call it your personality. What if you aren't choosing these things? What if they were chosen for you? Your relationship with your father became the blueprint for how you relate to yourself. If your father never supported your dreams, you learn to distrust your own. If he rarely expressed pride, you perform for validation, not fulfillment. If he didn't handle emotion, you suppress yours until they become unmanageable. If he carried unresolved fears, you inherited the emotional echoes. People underestimate how deeply a father's energy imprints on a child. Not through lectures, but through presence, through tone, through what he does when life gets difficult, through the parts of himself he never healed. You may have grown up believing emotional restraint is strength, that silence is maturity, that never needing help is independence, that your worth must be proven, not felt. But look at how tired you are, how disconnected you feel, how hard you fight battles no one sees, how you doubt every decision, how uncomfortable you feel when someone praises you, how guilty you feel when you rest. This isn't weakness, this is emotional conditioning. Healing begins with honesty, and honesty begins here. You didn't become this way alone. You learned your habits, defenses, reactions, fears, and hesitations. They were taught subtly, quietly, consistently. But here's the part no one told you. You can outgrow the emotional blueprint you were given. Just because you inherited patterns doesn't mean you're doomed to repeat them. Just because you were shaped by someone's limitations doesn't mean you can't rise beyond them. The moment you become aware of these patterns, the moment something inside you says, wait, maybe this isn't who I really am, that's the beginning of strength. But before you rebuild, you have to face something difficult. You have to see your father not just as a parent, but as a person with fears, a person shaped by his own upbringing, a person who survived rather than thrived, a person who loved in the only way he knew how, even if that way left you feeling unseen. Understanding this doesn't excuse anything, but it explains everything. And when you understand the origin of your patterns, you stop feeling defective and start feeling aware. Awareness is the first form of freedom. Once you begin that process, something shifts. A quiet strength begins to form. Not the strength your father modelled, but a new kind. One rooted in self-understanding. One that grows not from pretending to be invulnerable, but from understanding what made you vulnerable in the first place. Growing up isn't just about becoming independent. Growing up is separating your identity from your upbringing. It's looking at the emotional rules you inherited and asking, does this still serve me? Rules like, keep everything inside, don't burden anyone, stay quiet, don't disappoint, don't ask for help, don't show weakness. But look at what those rules cost you. They taught you how to endure, but not how to live, how to function, but not how to feel, how to survive, but not how to grow. You're not that child anymore. The threats you prepared for don't exist, yet part of you still lives as if they do. That's why you avoid difficult conversations, why you struggle with expressing emotion, why you overthink small decisions, why you exhaust yourself trying to be the version that keeps everyone comfortable. So let me ask you directly, who would you be if you weren't trying to meet the standards of the father you grew up with? Who would you be if you stopped living in the emotional shadow of his silence, his expectations, his distance? Your weakness isn't lack of strength, it's lack of permission. Permission you've been waiting to receive, without realising you can grant it to yourself. Real change won't come from sudden breakthroughs. It comes from small shifts repeated consistently. The moment you pause before shrinking. The moment you express something small you would have hidden. The moment you ask for help without guilt. The moment you let yourself rest without shame. The moment you choose honesty over avoidance. These moments accumulate and build a new internal voice, one that replaces the echo of your father's limitations with one that sounds like you, the real you. You are not responsible for the emotional gaps your father carried. You're only responsible for what you choose to carry forward. Your father's strength shaped you, but so did his weaknesses, his fears, his silence, his unhealed parts. But now you have something he didn't, awareness. And once you walk through that door, you realise you're not becoming weaker by confronting your past. You're becoming stronger by understanding it. Real strength isn't the absence of emotion. Real strength is acknowledging your patterns without judging yourself for them. It's seeing your father clearly, his best and his worst, without letting either define your future. You were never weak because of your father, you only believed you were. What you called weakness was the first step towards becoming stronger than the generation before you. Your story continues with you, not with the patterns you inherited, not with the weight you carried, but with the strength you are discovering within yourself. And that strength is only beginning to unfold.